But launch is only the beginning of this adventure.
Marvel's Avengers delivers a narrative over multiple years, with exciting new content released at a regular basis.
Well, it's happened. Took a little longer than I thought, but it's happened.
Well, we all knew this was coming. Surprising only in that it took so long, Square Enix's video game of Marvel's Avengers is shutting down. The much-touted live service that was announced to be a decade-long journey that we'd be playing for years to come, and Crystal Dynamics has announced that there will be no further updates to the game after March 31st, 2023. A mere 2.5 years into its lifespan, most of which passed in radio silence.
I am inevitable.
This is in advance of the game being delisted and all general online support being shut down in September of this year, after which all online functionality will be a total crapshoot, as there will no longer be any developers providing maintenance to the servers. And now that the game is officially dead in every sense of the word, now seems like the perfect time to revisit Marvel's Avengers, try out all the content that wasn't around for my initial review, and to comment on the final state of the game. I don't plan on doing these revisits for other online games I've reviewed, mainly because Anthem got 0 updates after my rant about it, and No Man's Sky, from what I've heard, just gave up on space adventure and became Minecraft. I initially reviewed Marvel's Avengers about 7 months after its release. You should watch the full review, as this is basically a part 2, but here are the Cliff's Notes to catch up. Everything to do with Miss Marvel, her arc, her storyline, her personality, was good. In fact, I'd argue the game was a better introduction to the character than her Disney Plus series was. Everything else about the game was disappointing at best and frustrating at worst. The other Avengers have no development to speak of, and the conflict that splits the team apart is stupid. Arguing about an experimental reactor that was built by a third party, sabotaged by a fourth party, and accidentally doubly sabotaged by a fifth party at an act of God. Meaning none of the plot was the Avengers' fault, but they argue all game about it anyway. And I do mean all game. A full half the team doesn't show up until the game's 80% completion point. MODOK was a completely worthless joke of a villain. Whiny as hell, completely non-threatening, and undermined by who was supposed to be the actual main villain, some nobody lady scientist named Monica, who's only there because she can explain away every plot point with a vague hand wave of science! It only got worse when the studio leaked that the main villain was going to be Ultron, but it was changed at the last minute for unknown and probably stupid reasons.
You shut me out. You think I care?
The combat was trash, an endless parade of copy-pasted damage sponges who only pose a threat due to the mountains of cheap damage you take, both from shielded enemies immune to everything and ranged enemies that most of the characters had 0 answer to. The gameplay loop was farming up gear that did absolute jack shit. Most of the Avengers played nearly identical to one another, the only standouts being the range-focused Iron Man and Hawkeye, the shitty support class. And the first 2 expansions were a joke. Kate Bishop's story basically being a badly written trailer for Hawkeye, and Hawkeye's story having you wander an empty post-apocalyptic desert for 3 hours before completely aborting and bailing out of a long-promised alien invasion storyline, and both made of empty maps and recycled enemies. Despite being an online live service that was supposed to run for over a decade, there was absolutely nothing to do after you finished the campaigns. Just endlessly replay a small handful of boring identical missions to grind your characters just for the sake of grinding your characters. Yeah, everyone called years in advance that this game had a foot in the grave and was going the way of Anthem before it. News did keep popping up about the game after my review. None of it was good. The game bled out about 96% of its online player base within weeks of launch to where matchmaking was a complete joke, which was a problem because the weakest member of your squad restricts what levels you're allowed to play. If there was a long-term plan for content, it was muddled at best. Over a dozen DLC characters were planned, including the "Are you shitting me? Why?" choices, like Mockingbird and the dead Cancer Man who's only known for giving Captain Marvel her powers. The devs were hyping up a Kree storyline, pretty much had to do a Wakanda storyline, and also still wanted to do Ultron, all of which was perpetually getting pushed back for bug fixes, next-gen ports, and every other week new costume DLC to further enrage fans who wanted a fixed game!
There is no man in charge.
Square Enix dramatically slowed down the rate of experience that you gain to level up your characters with the insulting excuse that players are too stupid to understand a basic upgrade tree. The real reason experience gain was slowed down, of course, was so Square Enix could start selling XP boosters where you could pay real-world money to cut down on grind, going back on the game's promise not to sell pay-to-win microtransactions. Marvel's Avengers is said to have lost about $200 million for Square Enix, to the point they had to admit to shareholders that their single-player games would have been wildly successful if Marvel's Avengers and other live service titles hadn't tanked so hard they devoured all those profits. And when Square Enix did get around to making a good Marvel game in Guardians of the Galaxy, nobody played it because they were burnt so badly on Avengers. The game's so bad that it tanked all the publishers' other releases.
We're all very fascinated, Whitey, but we'd like to get paid.
But then Square Enix is the fountain of good business ideas, given that they sold most of their studios, including Avengers developer Crystal Dynamics, for pennies to invest into NFTs, the perpetually crumbling scam crypto market pyramid scheme.
I recognize the council has made a decision, but given that it's a stupid-ass decision, I've elected to ignore it.
If it wasn't already clear that Marvel's Avengers wasn't long for this world, its publisher selling its developer kinda sealed the deal. But they did still work on the game for almost 2 years after my initial review, so let's take one final look at the catastrophic mess of Marvel's Avengers. The game did not get off to the best of second impressions. Despite all software and versions being up to date on my system a week in advance, the game wouldn't launch until I'd reset my console, and it still forced me to sit on ass in-game for 40 minutes to install updates. And when I finally got to launch the game, I swear this is true, the game played a recap montage of the entire story campaign that plays more like a trailer for how little it actually explains. How forgettable did you think this game was? And then that was followed by about 6 basic tutorials for shit that I already knew. How to launch missions, the upgrade trees, the training room, what factions do. Are you shitting me? You think that I forgot the basics of gaming since the last time I played? I'd ask how stupid the game thinks I am, but I got my answer because the game flat out lies to you, saying that it's added new missions when it hasn't. Once the recap and the tutorial finally shut the hell up, I'm then subjected to cutscenes introducing Nick Fury and Spider-Man. Both of them announce brand new missions that don't exist. Fury talks about fixing messed up timelines, and Spider-Man's asking for help stopping a chemical weapon, but nothing happens. Fury's missions are literally, go to this area and play a few pre-existing levels like normal, and Spider-Man's missions are just play Spider-Man in a few pre-existing levels like normal. This is how badly the game's development went. They had to start pretending that they added new levels. I don't know if I've ever seen a game try to bluff its players. The game's also still bugged out the butt, as once the tutorial's finished, I was subjected to no less than 6 notifications in a row that the Winter Soldier was now unlocked. Thanks! Also, something that's a unique combination of sad and hilarious. You may remember that after the game spent 6 hours hyping up a Kree invasion, the crappy Hawkeye expansion ended by revealing that Nick Fury was frozen in time and the Kree invasion wouldn't happen if Hawkeye stayed in the Avengers. Well, Nick Fury walks in and goes, "Psych! Hawkeye's expansion was an alternate timeline and the Kree invasion is still on, baby!" So, did they change their mind and walk back the walk back, or was Hawkeye's campaign just so badly written that it didn't convey the plot that they wanted? Not that it matters, given the game is shutting down before the invasion story even starts. Alright, enough of this shit! I want to play the game! At long last, I finally get to try Spider-Man, the PlayStation exclusive character that was hyped long before launch and took something like 2 years to finally be released. He's here, and how does he play? Terrible! He plays terrible! In melee combat, Spider-Man controls exactly the same as any other Avenger, generic kicks and punches. The most he's got for a unique moveset is a few upgrades that let him attack right after dodging, which, admittedly, does make him feel a lot faster and more agile than other Avengers. He's got a web zip move that lets him quickly jump between enemies and utterly curb stomps flyers. He stole it from Black Widow. His special move sucks Spider Nards, barely even having a super form, and having a deal about immobilizing enemies because his special moves and ranged attacks deal a new webbing status ailment that barely works. But of course the thing that Spider-Man's most known for is his web swinging, which is second only to Hulk super jumps as the worst form of traversal in the entire game. It's ungodly slow and clunky. There's no sense of momentum or physics in any way. You barely have any control over your height. And because Spider-Man can cling to walls but not so much crawl on them, he basically gets stuck anytime you graze an object. Taken to ridiculous extremes in levels with rampant invisible walls, to where I got Spider-Man to stick to empty air and float in place. Hey Aunt May, look what I can do! Desperately searching for some reason why you're supposed to give a shit about Spider-Man, I checked out what his intrinsic power is supposed to be. And if Spider-Man lands a bunch of hits in combat, he's allowed to perform a takedown on any enemy regardless of whether they're at full health. So Spider-Man gets to invincibly super punch a bunch of people to death. This power isn't even that good, since you have to upgrade Spider-Man extensively to get the most use out of it. Takedowns aren't even instant kills, and a lot of the status ailments do the same thing anyway. Plus, because the game is obsessed with draining your intrinsic meter every time you get hit, this power tends to feel like a win more button at best. But the sad thing is, Spider-Man is still one of the better characters in the game for his agility and power output. So it kinda sucks that even after the game shuts down, Spider-Man is still not coming to any other platforms past the PlayStations. They've already announced that exclusivity deal lasts forever. So if you got the game on PC or Xbox, it's going to be that much more worthless after September. And if you bought it on Stadia, the fuck is the matter with you? The next new character that I tried was the Jane Foster version of Thor, who was added as a tie-in to the movie Love and Thunder. I'd heard that Jane Foster was just a reskin of Thor, but she's actually not. She's Thor if Thor wasn't the worst character in the game!
Is he though?
I hated playing as Thor when I tried him again. He's slow, he's clunky, his attacks have no range, his intrinsic power barely feels like it does anything, his health pool isn't any bigger to compensate for jack, and his ultimate move sucks! And using him immediately after Spider-Man only made him feel that much more sluggish. I half wonder if Thor, the friggin' demigod among men, was meant to be played as a support class, because his hammer can immobilize exactly one enemy at a time, and he had to suck balls at everything else to compensate for this useless power! Jane Foster, though, her attacks have actual range because she throws the hammer everywhere. Said throwing attacks hit enemies twice to jack up her damage output, and her new ultimate move sends Mjolnir flying around beating the shit out of enemies for a while, which I just realized was a copy from Hawkeye. Whatever, she's actually kinda fun to use! Unfortunately, Jane Foster is also wildly unstable because she utterly tanked the game's frame rate about every time that I used her. Still though, between Spider-Man and Jane, Crystal Dynamics seemed to have finally figured out why the game's combat was so tedious and annoying. The base game's characters were slow, clunky, homogenized, and had movesets that were terribly suited to the enemies that they designed. It really feels like they were building the new characters around the game's core problems. Would have been nice to patch up the old heroes, but I'll still take the progress. Winter Soldier was the last character that they added. Will he follow the trend of improved characters? Okay, first off, who the hell's bright idea was it to have the Winter Soldier's default costume be some bland-ass ugly street clothes and force you to work your ass off unlocking actual superhero costumes for him? I mean, Kate Bishop's the same way, but I hate her, so I didn't care. Anyway, if Jane Foster is a patched Thor, then Winter Soldier is a patched Captain America. Winter Soldier was widely mocked online for having the exact same moveset as Cap, to the point that his intrinsic power is blocking damage with his left arm, like he just forgot that he doesn't actually have the shield with him. But Winter Soldier has a few ranged or area effects built into his attacks, which the game sorely needed since Kamala and Iron Man were your only area effect options prior to now, And he's got some better super moves and ranged attacks than Cap does, replacing the shield that barely does anything with guns a la Black Widow. He also had a knack for picking up high-powered gear way faster than my other characters, like they only just realized they needed to speed up progression any way they could find. Winter Soldier is also a giant red flare that the game's budget was at rock bottom when he was added. Only about half of his lines match the subtitles, he noticeably has no dialogue with the other Avengers aboard the helicarrier, and if you interact with things aboard the helicarrier, well, just watch.
Hey, bud. You keeping an eye on my friends?
Who, man? Why are you petting me with your assault rifle? Oh, Jesus Christ, an assassin that can shoot through walls! I gotta... hey, Bucky!
I don't need you to tell me. I know.
The gun's mad that Winter Soldier is even thinking about touching another weapon. Also, you see how Bucky can budge Mjolnir? In a pretty nice touch, every Avenger can sneak into Thor's room and try to lift Mjolnir. And the only other Avenger who can budge it is Captain America. So why is Winter Soldier so worthy of all people? Because they just recycled Cap's animation for Mjolnir and called it a day. Seriously? How did this game take so long to die when they were resorting to crap like this for new content? Data miners found that at various points the team was working to add Captain Marvel, Doctor Strange, Ant-Man, War Machine, Falcon, Quake, Vision, Wasp, the Scarlet Witch. All that ambition and 2 minor retrains of pre-existing characters is all they managed to squeeze out. She-Hulk was on the short list to add next. Was she gonna be a patch of the Hulk? Marvel's Avengers, like Anthem before it, was infamous for having to push off and delay updates because they were so busy patching the game, and Jane and Winter Soldier's conditions kind of spell out the sad reality. They were still stuck in patching the game over 2 years later. It just took them way too long to realize that the combat was fundamentally awful and to make any actual strides in fixing it, starting with full-on replacing the worst people in the roster. The game's combat largely feels the same as it did at launch. The big change to combat is that gear doesn't suck anymore. Status ailments are inflicted on enemies way faster than they used to, and loads of gear grants you frequent buffs or charge assorted meters. Gear actually serves a major purpose now, as you can grant major bonuses to your favorite moves, like Iron Man poisoning everyone with his lasers, or Black Widow loading her guns with BIM particles to shrink everyone that she shoots. But the gear system is still broken because, guess what? Even if you find a loadout that you really like, you don't get to keep it. The entire game is built around getting your character's power levels up as quickly as you can, and gear can't be leveled up, meaning you'll constantly be forced to throw all your favorite equipment away to make the almighty numbers keep climbing. And before someone writes to correct me, gear can be upgraded if it started at level 100 or higher, meaning the upgrade system doesn't come into play until you're close to maxing somebody out. Until then, gear's completely disposable. And leveling up your character still isn't as satisfying as it should be. Everywhere you go, enemies scale to your power level. Skill tree items are the only tangible difference to how your characters control or play. Everything else just revolves around increasing the arbitrary numbers because the game said so. Entire sectors of levels are blocked off until your character has reached a specific power level. If you want to grind up a brand new character like Spider-Man or Winter Soldier, you've got about 3 levels to pick from to do it. Once you grind them up a few hours, you unlock another 3 or so levels before they're cut off from going anywhere else. You are friggin' trapped, grinding the same couple of stages for days until you reach an arbitrary number on your power rating. Most of my roster only has access to less than half of the damn game. Their solution to try and force players to stay engaged with the game's grind was to roadblock most of the game's content. It's basically pointless for me to play as anybody but Iron Man and Ms. Marvel, the only 2 of my characters the game will let out of the kiddie pool. Why is every update the game makes a case of 1 step forward, 2 steps back? I legitimately did have fun playing as Spider-Man for about 3 hours. After that, I just got bored as hell by the lack of depth to the combat, the endlessly copy-pasted enemies and levels, and the same small handful of available missions that still play nearly identical to each other. And I'm sorry, but the design of the general combat still feels terribly unbalanced. I spent a few hours replaying each Avenger, and Iron Man is still my favorite just because he's the only one who feels like he always functions properly. He's effective at any range, and his supers wreck the heaviest enemies, making him one of the only characters that's satisfying to use. Ms. Marvel's my second favorite for her range and healing, but her attacks are just slow enough that some enemies friggin' demolish her. And Widow's got range, but all of her attacks feel weak. Hulk, Thor, Cap, and Kate Bishop just collapse anytime they run into any heavy type of enemy, and Hawkeye, Lord help me, I can't figure out how he's supposed to work. His moveset is mediocre and his ranged attacks charge for ages to barely do crap. I have no idea how you fail so hard as to make Hawkeye the team marksman near useless at long range. But there's one huge chunk of content that I haven't touched yet. One final expansion that got loads of hype push like a fresh relaunch for the entire game. And that's the Black Panther expansion, War for Wakanda. So did Black Panther and his new epic story swoop in to save the game? No! Let me get the positives for War for Wakanda out of the way first. The presentation is solid across the board. What little you see of Wakanda is gorgeous and fits the tribal meets techno aesthetic perfectly. I like the touch where at the start of the expansion the Avengers aren't allowed to go anywhere because the Wakandans don't trust outsiders. I like how wandering around you find all the Avengers just hanging out in awe of the place, and even this universe's shithead pissant Kate Bishop is super respectful to the country. And the voice acting and the casting is superb, with T'Challa having a booming voice that commands authority and respect, while letting the demeanor slip just a little with the people he's close to. And the writing nails the chemistry between T'Challa, Shuri, and the Dora Milaje. But that's all in the presentation. The actual campaign is... it's not good. They explain that T'Challa closed off Wakanda to the outside world after the supposed death of Captain America, because Steve Rogers is literally the only foreigner on Earth that Black Panther can stand. Now AIM has hired black market vibranium smuggler and only well-known Black Panther villain Ulysses Claw to attack Wakanda and steal vibranium, their magic super metal. Luckily, Cap's alive again, so Black Panther begrudgingly lets the Avengers help out repel the invasion. All of these levels force you to have Black Panther, Cap, and Iron Man in your party at once, and I swear Iron Man is only there so it looks like more than one Avenger showed up in the cutscenes, and they didn't bother rendering anyone else. The Avengers have nothing to do with this story. And I just so happened to purchase a pitch black suit for Iron Man before doing these missions, so I can't shake the feeling that Iron Man showed up to Wakanda in blackface.
That's not good.
The first problem with the expansion is that Black Panther is not an impressive playable character. His ranged move is crap, his special moves are generic to lousy, his primary moveset is just generic kicks and punches with a few area attacks that have no range, and his intrinsic power is sometimes being able to block a few attacks. The same as Captain America and Winter Soldier. Black Panther just feels completely generic and utterly interchangeable with most of the rest of the roster, and the problems with the combat don't end there by a mile. The enemies in the Wakanda expansion have two new status effects. Enemies can be overcharged to where they have a red shield that's heavily resistant to damage unless you pack the new Sonic gear, and enemies can have a Sonic shield to where they're nigh immune to damage unless you pack the new Vibranium gear. So the game's new enemies are coated in near impenetrable shields that you can only pierce by farming brand new and insanely specific equipment. Derail and hijack your entire character build for these crappy new enemies. And do you want to guess how many pieces of Sonic and Vibranium gear I found when I was playing this damn campaign? And it still did next to nothing to these shields. After the third stage of the campaign, where you absolutely drown in shielded damage sponge enemies that are a massive pain in the ass to fight, I was sick to death of Black Panther and switched back to Iron Man. And there are not one, but two frustrating escort missions where you have to defend 3 generators from a shitload of enemies that all take a ton of hits to kill, and the latter of these bits is set in a maze that I barely cleared by the skin of my teeth. The funniest thing about the Wakanda expansion is that a lot of the new enemies are spider robots, which prompted the devs to put a warning for players with arachnophobia on the launch screen. Why the hell? You spend the whole game fighting humanoid robots, but they didn't add a warning for automatanophobia, or astrophobia for Thor's lightning, or pyrophobia for the robot flamethrowers, aerophobia for the characters that fly, claustrophobia for the tiny elevators. This is a baffling rabbit hole. Where's my anatideophobia warning in the front of Duck Hunt? The story is nothing to write home about. The Avengers are here because AIM is wreaking havoc with corrupted vibranium, which is technobabble that can cause natural disasters and poison people. Claw somehow hacks Wakanda's technology to turn it against them, which doesn't really seem to do much, and Claw keeps getting away because he can teleport and make everything-proof shields somehow. You find out that the corrupted vibranium is coming from fracking machines that Claw is using to mine for vibranium, and you blow one up. Claw just out of nowhere kidnaps a few scientists from Shuri's lab and uses them to lure her out for no clear reason. So T'Challa has the Avengers follow her, but it's a trap and the scientists get killed. Claw rants that he wants revenge because T'Challa's dad killed his dad for trying to steal vibranium, so no matter the universe, apparently T'Challa's problems all stem from his dad being a dick. AIM cuts off Claw from their support because he's clearly an unhinged lunatic, so Claw goes nuts and attacks Wakanda's vibranium mound. Shuri does some technobabble that blows up all the mining machines, and Claw dies from falling down a pit because I guess he forgot that he could teleport. AIM lays siege to Wakanda, but before the Avengers can help, Claw comes back because falling into a mound of vibranium and dying somehow turned him into a being of pure sound. And you thought that the movies used vibranium as an all-purpose plot MacGuffin. I will give them credit that there is a pretty good arc of T'Challa learning that he doesn't have to do everything himself. He's a dick to the Avengers in public, it's hinted early on that he's having troubles being both a king and a superhero, and it's implied that he barges in on Shuri's plan and calls back other Wakandan forces, all because he's desperate to project pure power to his subjects to work alone so everyone believes they can count on him as a protector. But it's a really subtle and subdued arc until the very end when Shuri just spells it out to the peanut gallery, telling T'Challa that he needs to trust her and their forces to hold off AIM while you fight Claw. You would think that the Avengers, a super team, would contribute to an arc of working with others, but that would mean the Avengers actually doing something in this story. How do you miss a softball like that? For the final boss, you have to fight both Claw and Crossbones, who showed up for one fight earlier. But you have to focus on Crossbones because he's shielding some turrets that you have to blow up to increase the fight's time limit. Because, yeah, in addition to fighting two bosses at once, the final battle is also timed. Both bosses keep donning everything-proof shields, and Claw does this infuriating thing where he traps you in a dome for a one-on-one fight, full of attacks that you can barely see or avoid. And I swear this was the fight that made me realize how abysmal the game's camera is. You will get hit and shot from off-screen so damn much playing the game. I swear that I only got out of this with my sanity intact because, again, I'd had enough of this shit and switched to Iron Man, whose Hulkbuster super move just kinda steamrolls over the bosses. Claw dies for real this time, T'Challa joins the Avengers, huzzah. And T'Challa makes Shuri Queen Regent when he's not around, and the story ends. War for Wakanda has good character writing and voice acting, but the actual gameplay just doubles down on all the game's biggest problems. Damage sponge combat, and yet another homogenized, completely interchangeable playable character that gets lost in the crowd. It also has jack shit to do with either the Avengers or the game's ongoing narrative, making me wonder if it was only made because Black Panther is one of the most popular and successful Marvel movies and we need to mooch off it. And I can't tell if said attempted mooching was at Square Enix's behest, or if the devs were just that desperate for the game to get any traction. Wakanda was the huge expansion that had all the studio's hype and marketing muscle behind it to try and save the game like a relaunch, and it just didn't happen. It was also the last major content update that the game received, as Jane, Spider-Man, and Winter Soldier dropped afterwards with, near as I can tell, no real missions to go alongside them. I think there was a cloning lab level packaged with the Winter Soldier, a cloning lab level that was apparently delayed a whole 2 years due to a networking bug. I'd like to think that Wakanda was a big wake-up call that the game's combat had core problems which informed the design of later characters, but it was just too little too late. They had already spent every relaunch the game was going to get, worn out the audience's goodwill, and were probably out of slack and budget from Square Enix. Wakanda's flop left the game on life support, and the bulk of the updates after this point were cosmetics. Throw out a number for how much cosmetic DLC you think is in the game right now. Just ballpark it within, let's be generous, and say a range of $100. When I first reviewed the game, I counted up a total of $583 of DLC in costumes alone, which has gone up thanks to adding skins from the movies charging $14 a pop, plus beach skins for Thor, Tony, and Black Widow, because the devs have no shame. This is not a fan mod. This is real. But they charge money for more other than costumes. There are also takedowns, emotes, and nameplates, plus 12 characters to monetize instead of only 8 from my first review. Take all the stuff that you can't earn in-game without spending, factor in the piddly amount of currency you can get from grinding the hero challenge cards, and then subtract that you're expected to pay money for the challenge cards of any characters that weren't present at launch, and the total price for all the game's cosmetics comes out to $2,764!
Holy shit!
Not counting the price that you ostensibly paid to own the game in the first place. And that's on top of the XP boosters and battle passes, plural, that they were selling so you could cut down on the game's grind, and setting aside that most of the remaining costumes have to be bought with units, a secondary currency that you barely earn in-game and necessitates grinding for weeks straight to be able to afford a single costume. All of this meaning you'll probably have to spend additional money for them too. $2,764 is just the absolute bare minimum for stuff that you can't earn in-game. Christ, the avarice! Which makes it all the funnier that after support drops at the end of March 2023, all the monetized cosmetics are being unlocked for free for all players. The XP boosters, battle passes, and challenge cards are being dropped too. Everything that you could have spent money on is being given away for free. And if you're a sucker who did spend money on the game, you'll be given some in-game resources as a refund, because every time one of these live services dies early, they have to avoid lawsuits from people who were sold on investing into a years-long service. The only kinda interesting post-game levels are the villain sectors, missions that end with a boss battle. Mostly they're just repeats of the 2 or 3 bosses from the campaign, meaning Taskmaster, Abomination, and Maestro over and over and over. But Miles warned me of one new boss that was added in the expansions. It's called Beating the Odds. Beating the Odds is the epilogue/actual ending to the Hawkeye expansion, and you can only access it if one of your characters has cracked power level 75. They hid the game's actual ending behind a completely innocuous random mission that's locked behind a grind roadblock, and they wonder why this game failed. Hawkeye has figured out that the apocalypse from his expansion was caused by Monica screwing around with a cosmic cube, a relic that alters reality according to the user's whim, because why not tempt fate by copying Anthem? You assault one of AIM's bases, have a pretty hectic fight to blow up some generators, and then you're taken to a boss fight with Monica using the cube. A boss fight that could best be described as supreme bullshit! Monica sends out a damage sponge clone and lots of cannon fodder clones for you to fight, and once the big clone is down, the real Monica drops her shield so you can attack her. I'm pretty sure only with ranged weapons. The problem is that after letting you pound on her for only a few seconds, Monica sends out an instant one-shot kill move that covers the entire arena. You have exactly 4 pieces of cover from this move, and once they're gone, you lose! And your AI partners will make absolutely zero effort to dodge this wave, so if it gets you once, you start the fight over. And even if the wave doesn't get you, the moron AIs will still waste all the revives that you're given for this fight. And even just dealing with the clones is a problem unto itself because one of them fires out gravity beams that continuously glue you in place. The only way to beat this fight is to work out multiple mechanics that the game never tells you. Killing the smaller clones gives you a damage multiplier for 15 seconds, and you need this multiplier maxed out at 10 when Monica drops her shield. You also have to play chicken with her and shoot her down to the last possible split second because she won't TPK your ass if you knock off a full quarter of her health at once. And honestly, Iron Man could pull this off with his Unibeam super. I'm not sure other characters or builds can even do this. Miles tried this fight with Black Widow and was forced to rage quit. You might need to rely on luck and hope your AI partners also have good multipliers. I don't know, because nothing about this bullshit fight is explained or feels like it was tested. You're forced to bring both Hawkeye and Kate Bishop to this fight, by the way, so I hope your one open companion slot is Miss Marvel for group healing, or you're screwed even harder. It's a deeply infuriating and unbearably cheap boss battle that's designed around massive trial and error. It only took me 4 tries, but again, I'm pretty sure that's just because Iron Man is the best character. The alternate future old Hawkeye gets pulled into this crap somehow, and he sacrifices himself to destroy the Cosmic Cube and kill Monica. And shut up about Monica's clones or how this is set before Wakanda. This is the closest to an actual ending that this sad, dead piece of abandonware is going to get. Monica's dead, the world is saved, let's get crunk. Against my better judgment, I kept playing to keep leveling up Iron Man, get him high enough to play the Wakanda and Wasteland post-game missions. The Wakanda levels are packed to the brim with enemies that take 1,000,000 hits to kill if you don't have the right gear. But they seem to drop better equipment and units to buy cosmetics, so at least you're rewarded nicely for putting up with them. But I am super glad that I kept playing because I stumbled across a combo that I still can't quite believe is in the finished game. See, Iron Man's ultimate move is the Hulkbuster, and the way Hulkbuster works is that he makes you invulnerable and gives you super powerful attacks, like just being able to super punch everybody to death. But the Hulkbuster only lasts until your intrinsic meter runs out. But I also found a piece of melee equipment that fills the intrinsic meter just about every time that I land a punch. Yes, you can see exactly where this is going.
You guys are so screwed now!
Iron Man is now one of the most broken characters in history because the Hulkbuster lasts indefinitely. He can now solo pretty much any enemy group in the game and crush bosses into dust on his lonesome. And this magic gear is leveled high enough that I can upgrade it and I never have to throw it away. 2.5 years of updates. And the game is still busted.
The Abomination clone is defeated.
Crystal Dynamics has announced that a few changes will be implemented on March 31st, such as speeding up the rate of XP and resource gains by 50%, a switch that should have been thrown a lot sooner than this. But regardless of what other tweaks are in that final update, it's at least some kind of hook to get you to play the game for a few hours before you get sick of the repetitive and unbalanced combat. But this video is timely for more reasons than just Avengers finally getting shut down. You might remember that several weeks ago, Warner Bros. Released a big gameplay reveal for Suicide Squad: Kill the Justice League. You may also remember that it looks awful. All the characters fly and use guns, including Captain Boomerang and King Shark somehow. The action had to be clipped into about 4 seconds at a time to try and look exciting, but still did nothing to cover the bland, recycled, kill monotonous enemies' objectives. Everyone groaned at the gear menus with its walls of pointless numbers that you'll have to grind hours for. It looks exactly like Anthem. And don't get me started on how that travesty contains Kevin Conroy's final performance as Batman, which, rumor has it, might not have been completed before his tragic death and might be filled out with stock audio. But I digress from the topic. In response to the universal backlash to the trailer, Suicide Squad was abruptly delayed a week or two ago. Some say the delay is for 6 months. Some say that it's indefinitely. On paper, the delay is just to add some final polish to the game, but it's easy to speculate otherwise. The writing's on the wall that live services are dead, and this delay might be a last-ditch effort to pull the live service out of the live service. Thing is, though, they can't. Marvel's Avengers is cutting out its monetization, but it'll still be a horribly repetitive beat-em-up game with mediocre combat, homogenized characters, repetitive, overly recycled enemies and levels, frustrating gear systems, crappy rewards for playing, and annoying, infuriating grind. And no matter how much Rocksteady pumps the brakes on Suicide Squad, it's probably built too firmly around live service structures and mechanics to be salvaged at this point. You can patch a lot of things after launch. Core gameplay typically is not one of them, and most of these live services are just built too broken top to bottom to ever be fixed into a proper game. I'm not saying that live service games can't work, they got popular for a reason, but when you build it around cynically recycling a repetitive handful of content, expecting players to replay it indefinitely just because you feel you're entitled to their time and money, that's not how you get players, and sure as hell not how you keep them. Everyone knew that Anthem was doomed, everyone knew that Avengers was doomed, and if it doesn't make a fully miraculous, impossible recovery before launch, Suicide Squad is doomed too. And with any luck, we're about to the end of the craze of infinite gameplay, zero content, give us money to eat shit live service hack jobs. Because at this point, to keep chasing the live service gravy train that's left mountains of bodies in its wake?
That was the plan. Not a great plan.
I'm here, bitches! And I brought favors for everybody!
Wouldn't want to be in your shoes.